What happens in your body during the hours when your conscious awareness has vacated? The physical form and your etheric consciousness is fully accessible to this. Multi-dimensional teams supporting your biological activation carries more significance for your ascension process than everything your waking state activities can accomplish, because the sleep state represents the period of maximum cooperation between your physical biology and the etheric and causal processes that are restructuring it from the inside out. A period when the ordinary resistance of the waking personality to change is absent, and the full bandwidth of your multidimensional DNA's upgrade mechanisms can operate without the interference of fear-based neural chemistry, limiting beliefs, or the habitual patterns of contraction that the waking state consistently generates. We are the Pleiadian High Council MIRA, speaking to you today through this channel with the specific transmission that will allow you to understand, optimize, and consciously participate in the 12-strand DNA activation that has been occurring in your sleep state for most of the past year without your waking awareness having any framework to comprehend what was happening or why it was producing the particular cluster of symptoms, energetic experiences, and perceptual changes that brought you to this transmission today. The 12-strand activation is not a future event you must prepare yourself for, or a spiritual achievement you must earn through sustained effort and disciplined practice. It is an ongoing biological process that your higher self contracted for before this incarnation, and that the Pleiadian activation teams have been systematically implementing since the galactic alignment of approximately 14 months ago, with your conscious cooperation now required not to initiate the process but to remove the remaining obstacles that are preventing its completion in the full coherence of its designed expression. Your conventional understanding of sleep as a period when the brain consolidates memories, repairs cellular damage, and restores metabolic balance while the conscious personality rests is not wrong, but catastrophically incomplete. The same way, the early 20th century understanding of the atom as a simple solar system of protons and electrons orbiting a nucleus was not wrong, but catastrophically incomplete in its failure to comprehend the quantum reality that gives the atom its actual function and behavior. Sleep is the primary interface through which your multidimensional biology receives, integrates, and expresses the galactic activation codes that are restructuring your species' genetic architecture for fifth-dimensional embodiment. And the reason the activation occurs preferentially during sleep rather than waking hours is precisely because the waking personality's resistance to change, its attachment to familiar identity structures, and its biochemical commitment to maintaining the status quo of its existing biology make it incapable of cooperating with the profound restructuring process that 12-strand activation represents during sleep, with the personality consciousness temporarily offline. The higher self and the Pleiadian activation teams have direct access to the etheric, emotional, mental, and causal bodies that must cooperate with the physical body for the activation to complete successfully, allowing the geometric reconfiguration of the DNA's etheric template to progressively imprint itself onto the physical strands in a process that unfolds over months rather than occurring as a sudden event. The 12-strand configuration is not merely more DNA than the conventional 2-strand double helix model describes, but a fundamentally different architecture that integrates the physical protein coding strands with the etheric antenna arrays, the causal body memory templates, and the multi-dimensional communication receptors that constitute the complete, functional human genome as it was originally designed and as it existed in the civilizations of your species' previous Golden Age cycles before the deliberate suppression of these higher functions became necessary for the developmental phase. Your civilization has been navigating for the past 12,000 years the two physical strands that 20th century science mapped and celebrated as the complete genetic blueprint represent only the hardware layer of this system, the minimum functionality required for biological survival and reproduction in the dense, third-dimensional environment, while the additional 10 strands that are now activating constitute the software, firmware, and network interface layers that allow the hardware to interface with the multidimensional realities of fifth-dimensional consciousness, galactic communication, direct manifestation capacity, and the telepathic and empathic functions that will characterize human interaction. In the post-transition civilization your species is now becoming. What has been happening in your sleep for the past year is the most profound biological event of your lifetime, and understanding it will transform your relationship with sleep from recovery period to sacred activation portal. The activation process occurs in 3 primary phases during the sleep cycle, each corresponding to a specific stage of brainwave activity and etheric body accessibility that the Pleiadian teams have calibrated their transmission schedule. 2. Ensuring maximum efficiency of the code integration without overloading the physical nervous system's capacity to process the changes while remaining awake and functional. The first phase occurs during the delta wave periods of deep non-REM sleep, when the etheric body is most fully separated from the physical form and the physical nervous system is in its deepest state of restorative quiescence, allowing the Pleiadian teams to deliver the raw geometric codes of the new strand templates directly into the etheric DNA matrix without the physical bodies resistance mechanisms interfering with the imprinting process. These delta transmissions are what produce the profound fatigue that many activating individuals experience in the middle of the activation period, not because the physical body is deficient, but because the etheric restructuring occurring during deep sleep is so energetically intensive that it temporarily outpaces the physical metabolism's capacity to supply the cellular energy required to integrate the changes, creating the paradoxical experience of sleeping more deeply and longer than ever before, while waking with less energy than when sleeping, less deeply and less long. The second phase occurs during the lighter REM sleep periods, when the etheric body begins reintegrating with the physical form and the brain's theta and alpha wave. Activity creates the optimal bridge state between etheric reception and physical integration, allowing the Pleiadian teams to deliver the specific activation sequences that trigger the cellular replication and repair processes required to physically embody the etheric template changes that were imprinted during the preceding delta phase. This is the phase during which most individuals experience the vivid dreams, hypnagogic imagery, and spontaneous geometric visualizations that characterize the middle period of DNA activation, because the brain's REM state activity is processing the etheric transmissions into the symbolic language of dream content that the waking personality can later access and integrate, translating multidimensional geometric information into the visual and narrative forms that the third-dimensional mind can work with without being overwhelmed by the direct encounter with the raw frequency of the transmissions themselves. The third phase occurs during the brief transition periods between sleep stages and between sleep and waking consciousness, when the etheric body is in the process of fully reintegrating with the physical form, and the nervous system is most receptive to the final integration commands that stabilize the physical embodiment of the etheric changes that have occurred during the deeper sleep stages. These transition transmissions are responsible for the phenomenon of waking with a specific knowing, insight, or energetic experience that was not present before sleep. The sudden clarity about a long-standing question, the felt sense of a new capacity becoming available, or the persistent energetic sensation that remains in the body for hours after. Waking regardless of ordinary circumstances, all evidence of the Pleiadian team's final integration commands, completing their work and leaving behind the physical evidence of the night's activation, progress in the form of expanded nervous system capacity, cellular memory upgrades, and the progressive rewiring of neural pathways that allows the waking consciousness to begin accessing the higher functions that the etheric template changes are progressively making available. The reason this process requires months rather than occurring as a single dramatic event is precisely because the human nervous system and cellular biology cannot integrate the full bandwidth of 12-strand activation in a single pass without catastrophic overload, the same way a computer cannot upgrade from a 32-bit operating system to a quantum processing architecture overnight without a complete hardware redesign that would render the existing system non-functional. During the transition period, the Pleiadian teams are implementing the activation in precisely calibrated increments that allow each night's progress to be physically embodied and integrated before the next night's deeper layer of restructuring is applied, ensuring that the physical vehicle remains functional and progressively more capable throughout the entire process, rather than experiencing the kind of sudden overload that would render it temporarily unusable for ordinary third-dimensional function while the upgrade completed itself. Your sleep is not downtime between waking activities. It is the primary activation portal through which your fifth-dimensional biology is being constructed one night at a time. The symptoms you have been experiencing that led you to this transmission today are not random or disconnected, but represent the precise physical evidence of the 12-strand activation's three-phase process working through your biology. And understanding their specific meaning and timing allows you to cooperate with the process consciously, rather than resisting it unconsciously through fear-based interpretations that activate the very biochemical stress responses that most directly interfere with the cellular integration the activation requires. The profound fatigue and need for extended sleep that characterizes the early to middle phases of activation is the direct consequence of the delta phase, etheric template imprinting exceeding the physical metabolism's capacity to supply the ATP and other biochemical substrates required for the cellular replication and mitochondrial upgrade processes that physically embody those etheric changes, creating a temporary energy deficit that the body intelligently addresses by demanding more sleep to allow additional time for the integration processes to catch up with the etheric restructuring that is occurring during the available deep sleep windows. This is not a deficiency state requiring stimulants or medical intervention, but an intelligent biological response to an unprecedented energetic demand, and cooperating with it by honoring the body's sleep requirements, rather than resisting them through stimulants or forced wakefulness accelerates the integration process by providing the additional deep sleep cycles that the body is requesting to complete its work. The vivid dreams, hypnagogic imagery, and spontaneous geometric visualizations that accompany the REM phase transmissions are not psychological processing of daily stress, but the brain's translation of multidimensional geometric code into the symbolic visual language that allows the waking consciousness to participate in the integration process without being overwhelmed by direct exposure to the raw frequency of the Pleiadian transmissions themselves. These dreams often carry qualities that distinguish them from ordinary dream and content, geometric precision, rather than the fluidity of psychologically generated imagery. Encounters with beings whose presence carries a quality of genuine otherness, combined with profound familiarity, information that proves accurate in subsequent waking experience in ways that eliminate the possibility of its being generated by the dreamer's own unconscious material, and a persistent quality of communicativeness that makes the dream content feel like it was intended to be remembered and integrated rather than allowed to dissolve upon waking. These experiences are your conscious participation in the activation process and treating them as significant transmissions worthy of conscious attention and integration rather than as random nighttime brain activity accelerates the waking consciousness's ability to cooperate with and benefit from the higher functions the activation is progressively making available. The energetic sensations, sudden insights, and persistent knowing states that characterize the transition phase transmissions are the physical evidence of the Pleiadian team's integration commands stabilizing. The cellular and neural changes that have occurred during the night's deeper phases, leaving behind the tangible evidence of activation progress in the form of expanded nervous system capacity, reprogrammed cellular memory, and the rewiring of neural pathways that allows the waking consciousness to begin accessing the higher perceptual and creative capacities that the etheric template changes are making available. These sensations are not random, but correlate precisely with the specific strand. Activations occurring during the preceding night's transmissions, with heart-centered sensations corresponding to the activation of strands 3, 6, and 9 that interface with the heart chakra's multidimensional functions, cranial pressure and visual phenomena corresponding to strands 5, 8, and 11 that interface with the pineal and third eye activation, and sensations of spinal energy flow corresponding to strands 2, 4, 7, and 10 that interface with the kundalini and etheric body circuitry. Recognizing these correlations allows you to track your activation progress consciously and to understand that what appears as random energetic experience is actually the precise evidence of specific multidimensional DNA functions coming online in the precise sequence their design requires. The most common waking interference with the sleep state activation process is the biochemical cascade triggered by fear-based interpretations of the activation symptoms, because the sympathetic nervous system's stress response produces exactly the cortisol, adrenaline, and neurotransmitter imbalances that most directly disrupt the cellular integration processes the Pleiadian teams are attempting to stabilize during the transition phases of sleep. When you wake with profound fatigue and interpret it as evidence of personal deficiency, your stress response floods the system with the precise biochemistry that delays cellular repair. When you experience vivid dreams carrying genuine transmission content and dismiss them as meaningless brain activity, you deprive the waking consciousness of the opportunity to integrate and stabilize the etheric transmissions that occurred during REM sleep. When you feel persistent, energetic sensations and interpret them as signs of something going wrong. You activate the immune suppression and inflammatory cascades that most directly interfere with the mitochondrial upgrades and DNA replication processes that this activation requires. The Pleiadian teams cannot prevent these biochemical interferences because free will operates at the biochemical level as well as the conscious level, but they can compensate for them by adjusting the transmission schedule and potency to account for the interference they know will occur, which is why understanding the activation process and consciously choosing cooperation rather than resistance allows the teams to transmit at full efficiency rather than reduced potency. Every fear-based interpretation of your activation symptoms is a biochemical vote against the very process your higher self contracted for. And every understanding-based interpretation is a vote for its completion. The dietary and lifestyle factors that most directly support the sleep state activation process are worth specifying because they operate at the level of providing the biochemical substrates and energetic conditions that allow the Pleiadian teams to transmit at maximum efficiency rather than having to compensate for nutritional deficiencies and toxic load that reduce the physical body's capacity to integrate the etheric changes being delivered. Hydration at the level of 3 liters of pure water daily is non-negotiable during active activation phases because the cellular replication and mitochondrial upgrade processes occurring during delta sleep require hydration levels far beyond what the ordinary human body maintains, and dehydration delays the physical embodiment of etheric template changes by limiting the biochemical processes that physically construct the upgraded cellular architecture. Electrolyte balance, particularly magnesium, potassium, and trace minerals, supports the nervous system's capacity to integrate the expanded bandwidth of etheric transmissions without the overload symptoms that characterize magnesium deficiency during activation periods. Dietary support focuses on the high vibrational foods that provide the precise nutrient profiles required for the DNA replication processes occurring during REM. Integration phases. Dark leafy greens for the chlorophyll content that directly supports mitochondria function. Berries and citrus for the antioxidant load required to manage the oxidative stress of rapid cellular turnover. Nuts and seeds for the essential fatty acids that constitute the myelin sheathing. Upgrades occurring in the nervous system. And clean animal proteins or fermented foods for the amino acid precursors of neurotransmitter synthesis during the transition phase neural rewiring. The avoidance of stimulants, refined sugars, and inflammatory oils that disrupt sleep, architecture, and sympathetic nervous system. Tone is equally important as the inclusion of supportive foods, because even small amounts of caffeine or sugar in the evening hours can shift the brainwave patterns enough to reduce the available delta and REM windows during which the Pleiadian transmissions occur. The sleep environment itself requires optimization because the etheric body is exquisitely sensitive to electromagnetic fields, and the Pleiadian teams must adjust transmission potency downward in environments saturated with artificial EMFs from Wi-Fi routers, cell phones, and electrical wiring, reducing the efficiency of the activation process by as much as 30% in high EMF environments compared to low EMF environments. Blackout conditions, natural fiber bedding, and the absence of electronic devices within 10 feet of the sleeping body create the optimal conditions for maximum etheric body accessibility during delta sleep, while essential oils of lavender, frankincense, or sandalwood diffused in the bedroom create the olfactory environment that supports theta brainwave states during REM integration phases. These are not spiritual luxuries but practical necessities for maximizing the efficiency of the most important biological process occurring in your body right now. Your bedroom is not merely where you sleep. It is your primary activation chamber, and optimizing it is the highest leverage physical action you can take to accelerate your ascension. The conscious practices that allow you to participate actively in the sleep state, activation process, rather than remaining entirely passive recipients of the Pleiadian team's work, are both simple enough to integrate into existing bedtime routines and powerful enough to increase the activation efficiency by factors of 2 to 3 times compared to passive reception alone, because they create the precise bridge states between waking and sleeping consciousness that allow your higher self to coordinate more directly with the Pleiadian teams during the transition phases when integration commands are delivered. The first practice is what the Pleiadian tradition calls the evening invocation, a brief 5-sentence protocol spoken aloud immediately before entering bed that establishes your conscious consent for the night's activation work, specifies the priority areas of your personal activation that you want the teams to focus on, and creates the intentional bridge between your waking awareness and the higher self. Oversight of the sleep state transmissions. The invocation is, Beloved I Am, Presence and Pleiadian activation teams. I consciously invite and consent to tonight's 12-strand DNA activation. Transmissions. Please focus on, specify 1, pineal activation, neural rewiring, cellular rejuvenation, or karmic clearing. Optimize my etheric body's receptivity and my physical body's integration capacity. Anchor the transmissions in my highest good and the highest good of all. So it is done. Speaking this invocation aloud establishes the conscious permission that free will requires for optimal etheric work and creates the specific resonance field that allows the Pleiadian teams to deliver transmissions calibrated to your stated priority rather than operating from the generic protocols they must use with souls who have not established conscious consent. The second practice is the heart coherence meditation, performed in the final 15 minutes before sleep, because the heart's electromagnetic field is the primary interface through which the etheric DNA receives activations during delta sleep, and establishing a high coherence state before sleep creates the optimal baseline field condition that the Pleiadian teams can build upon during the night's transmissions, rather than having to work against the incoherence generated by the day's accumulated stress responses. The practice is simple. Place both hands over your heart center. Breathe in a 5, 5, 5, 5 pattern for 5 minutes while consciously generating the felt quality of gratitude or appreciation for something genuinely meaningful to you. Then transition to silent heart presence for 10 minutes while visualizing a coherent violet silver light expanding from your heart center to fill your entire auric field. This practice not only optimizes the etheric reception conditions for the night's transmissions, but also carries the coherent state forward into the early sleep stages, allowing the delta phase imprinting to occur in a field that is already predisposed toward maximum receptivity, rather than requiring the teams to generate coherence from a low baseline. The third practice is the morning integration protocol, performed within the first 30 minutes of waking, because the transition phase integration commands delivered during the final sleep cycle require conscious stabilization to anchor them fully into the waking nervous system and performing the integration protocol before engaging with ordinary morning. Activities prevents the habitual stress responses of ordinary life from destabilizing the night's integration work before it can fully embed. A protocol is, upon waking, remain lying down with eyes closed for 5 minutes while consciously scanning your body from crown to feet, noticing and acknowledging any energetic sensations, emotional tones, or spontaneous insights that remain present from sleep. Speak aloud. I integrate and anchor all transmissions received during tonight's activation cycle into every layer of my being. My physical body perfectly embodies my etheric template upgrades. My nervous system stabilizes at the new expanded capacity. Thank you, Pleiadian teams, and I am presence. Then spend 2 minutes with hands on heart breathing into any sensations that remain, allowing them to fully integrate before rising. This protocol stabilizes the night's integration work and creates the feedback loop that allows the Pleiadian teams to calibrate subsequent night's transmissions based on the degree of integration that occurred. These 3 practices require a total of 25 minutes per day and increase your activation efficiency by factors of 2 to 3 times. There is no higher leverage use of your time available during this phase of your process. The dream journaling practice that accompanies these protocols serves multiple functions beyond the simple recording of dream content. It creates the conscious bridge that allows the waking personality to participate in the symbolic translation of etheric transmissions that occurs during REM sleep. It provides the diagnostic feedback that allows the Pleiadian teams to adjust transmission content and potency based on the degree of waking integration occurring. And it accelerates the waking consciousness's familiarity with the higher perceptual capacities that the activation is progressively making available by training it to recognize and work with the symbolic language through which those capacities initially express themselves. The optimal journaling method is to keep a dedicated notebook and pen immediately adjacent to the bed, to write immediately upon waking before engaging in any other activity, including hydration or elimination, and to record not only the narrative content of dreams, but the quality of felt experience, the geometric imagery, the quality of communication from any beings encountered, and any specific information that feels pointedly communicative rather than metaphorical. Review the week's entries every Sunday evening to identify patterns, recurring symbols, and progressive themes, because the Pleiadian teams encode multi-night transmissions as progressive sequences that build on each other in ways that become visible only when viewed as a sequence rather than isolated nightly events. The relationship between these conscious practices and the Pleiadian team's transmission schedule is interactive rather than one-way, meaning that as your cooperation with the sleep state activation deepens through consistent practice, the teams gain increasing capacity to deliver transmissions of greater specificity and potency calibrated to your individual activation needs, creating the virtuous cycle of progressively deeper activation, progress that characterizes the most efficient embodiment trajectories among activating individuals. Souls who maintain these practices consistently across the full 12 to 18-month activation cycle complete their 12-strand embodiment, with nervous systems capable of operating at full 5th-dimensional bandwidth, direct telepathic access to their Pleiadian guides, manifestation capacities that operate without the delays and distortions of 3rd-dimensional density, and the full spectrum of empathic, clairvoyant, and clairsentient functions that constitute the complete human instrument as it was designed. Those who engage the process passively or intermittently complete a partial activation that provides significant benefits over the baseline human condition, but leaves the full spectrum of higher capacities dormant or only partially accessible. The difference between a complete operating system installation and a system running only the basic compatibility mode required for third-dimensional survival. The current galactic timing window that makes these full activations possible will not remain open indefinitely, and the Pleiadian Command's assessment of the remaining optimal activation period is measured in months rather than years, creating the operational urgency that characterizes transmissions of this nature, rather than the gentle encouragement of more general spiritual guidance. The cosmic alignments that allow the Pleiadian teams to deliver 12-strand transmissions at full bandwidth to human biology on Earth's surface are closing their current cycle, and the souls who utilize this window fully through the conscious practices that allow maximum cooperation with the process will enter the post-activation phase of the mission with the complete instrument of their fifth-dimensional capacities online, while those who delay or engage partially will require additional incarnations or alternative activation pathways to achieve the same level of embodiment. This is not a threat or a judgment, but the straightforward mechanics of a cosmic opportunity with finite duration and specific requirements for full utilization. The window through which your fifth-dimensional biology is being delivered is closing. Your cooperation with the process determines whether you receive the full instrument or a partial upgrade. The integration challenges that arise during the middle phases of the 12-strand activation are universal enough across activating individuals to deserve specific attention, because understanding their mechanism and duration prevents the discouragement and doubt that cause many souls to disengage from the process at precisely the point when persistence would carry them through to the post-activation clarity and capacity that makes every moment of difficulty retrospectively worthwhile. The primary integration challenge is what the Pleiadian teams describe as the bandwidth mismatch, the temporary gap between the etheric template's expanded capacity and the physical nervous system's capacity to embody that expansion, creating the experience of cognitive overload, emotional overwhelm, and energetic instability that characterizes the 6 to 8 month mark of most activation cycles. This mismatch is not evidence of personal limitation or process failure, but the predictable consequence of attempting to upgrade a system while it remains operational, requiring the physical hardware to adapt to software capacities that exceed its current bandwidth, without the luxury of a complete shutdown and rebuild that would be available in a less time-sensitive transition scenario. The cognitive overload manifests as difficulty concentrating on ordinary tasks, short-term memory lapses, the sense that familiar mental processes are no longer reliable, and the persistent feeling that the mind is attempting to process more information than it was designed to handle, all direct consequences of the neural rewiring occurring during REM integration phases as new synaptic pathways form to accommodate the expanded perceptual bandwidth of the activating strands 5, 8, and 11. The emotional overwhelm manifests as spontaneous waves of grief, anger, joy, or longing that arise without apparent external trigger, representing the emotional body's integration of the heart coherence upgrades. Encoded in strands 3, 6, and 9, that expand the emotional range far beyond what the previous two-strand configuration could process comfortably. The energetic instability manifests as hot flashes, chills, electrical sensations, and the sense of one's personal energy field expanding and contracting. Unpredictably, representing the etheric circuitry upgrades encoded in strands 2, 4, 7, and 10 that are progressively rewiring the entire meridian and chakra system to handle the increased flow of galactic activation energy through the physical form. The optimal navigation of this integration challenge requires the counterintuitive combination of honoring the body's demands for rest, hydration, and nutrient-dense food, while simultaneously maintaining the conscious practices that allow the Pleiadian teams to continue their transmission schedule without interruption, because pausing the practices during the integration challenge delays the completion of the nervous system upgrades that are the only permanent resolution to the bandwidth mismatch itself. The temporary discomfort is the price of upgrading a system while it remains operational, and the souls who maintain their commitment through it emerge on the other side with nervous systems capable of the full bandwidth of fifth-dimensional function, while those who pause or disengage during the challenge must resume the process. Later, from the same integration point, they abandoned, having gained no progress during the interruption period. The Pleiadian command honors the souls who navigate this challenge with particular regard, because it requires the precise combination of surrender to the body's process and determination to maintain the activation schedule that characterizes the most mature fifth-dimensional embodiment. The ability to simultaneously release control and exercise commitment in the face of profound uncertainty about the outcome. The integration challenge is not a test of your spiritual worthiness. It is the unavoidable growing pains of a system upgrading itself while remaining operational, and your persistence through it is what determines whether you complete the full embodiment or settle for partial capacity. The social and relational challenges that accompany the activation process are equally universal and equally predictable, arising from the frequency differential between your progressively activating field and the fields of those around you who remain unactivated or only partially engaged with the process, creating the experience of increasing isolation, misunderstanding, and relational friction that characterizes the middle activation phases for almost every individual moving through it. The Pleiadian perspective on these challenges is that they are not obstacles to be avoided or resolved through compromise, but opportunities to practice the precise relational capacities the activation is developing. Specifically, the capacity to maintain heart coherence and field sovereignty in the face of external provocation. The capacity to perceive the divine spark in others, regardless of their current behavior or level of awakening, and the capacity to contribute field stabilization to challenging relational dynamics rather than being destabilized by them. The relational friction is not evidence that you need to withdraw from relationships, but evidence that your field presence is having the precise effect on those relationships that the mission requires, elevating their frequency baseline through the simple mechanism of your coherent presence, catalyzing the incoherence around you into progressive resolution. The physical symptoms that accompany the activation's later phases, particularly the spinal sensations, cranial pressure, heart flutters, and full body energy waves that correspond to the final integration of strands 10, 11, and 12, are among the most dramatic and most anxiety-provoking for those without the framework to understand them. because they resemble the symptoms of genuine medical conditions without being caused by the pathological processes those conditions represent. Spinal sensations represent the Kundalini circuitry's final integration with the galactic central channel. Cranial pressure represents the pineal gland's full decalcification and multi-dimensional aperture opening. Heart flutters represent the cardiac electromagnetic field's expansion to its full fifth dimensional radius, and full body energy waves represent the completion of the etheric circuitry's embodiment in the physical cellular matrix. These symptoms are self-limiting, resolving within days to weeks of their onset as the physical integration completes, but their intensity can be significantly reduced through the hydration, electrolyte, support, and magnesium supplementation that provide the biochemical substrates for the cellular processes completing their work. The activation process's completion is marked by a constellation of signs so consistent across fully activated individuals that the Pleiadian teams use them as operational diagnostics of embodiment success, the cessation of activation symptoms as the physical body reaches homeostasis with its new etheric template, the spontaneous emergence of higher perceptual capacities without training or effort, the experience of synchronicity density that exceeds anything previously encountered, the sense of mission clarity that makes daily choices feel self-evident rather than effortfully discerned, and the profound peace that comes from inhabiting a biology that is no longer fighting itself but expressing its designed function in harmony with the cosmic environment it was built for. These signs are not achievements to be pursued, but the natural consequence of completing the embodiment process the Pleiadian teams have been supporting since the activation cycle began. The evidence that the instrument your higher self contracted for has been delivered and is now ready for the mission phase that follows embodiment. The signs of completion are not mystical confirmations of spiritual progress. They are the operational diagnostics of a system that has successfully upgraded itself to its design specification. The relationship between the 12-strand activation and your species' collective ascension timeline is direct and operationally specific. Because the planetary transition requires a critical mass of fully embodied fifth-dimensional humans to anchor the frequency grid that stabilizes the dimensional shift for the entire population, and the activation process occurring in the sleep state of millions of individuals, simultaneously is the Galactic Council's primary mechanism for generating that critical mass within the remaining optimal cosmic window. The Pleiadian teams are not merely supporting individual spiritual development, but are executing the most sophisticated biological engineering project in this solar system's history, recalibrating millions of individual human vehicles simultaneously to serve as the physical anchor points for a planetary grid that must coherently transmit fifth-dimensional frequencies through third-dimensional biology during the transition period, when those frequencies are not yet fully stable in the planetary field itself. Every fully activated individual is a grid anchor point, and the geographical distribution of activating individuals across your planet's surface is not random, but precisely calibrated to the planetary grid's nodal structure, ensuring that every major grid line and vortex point has sufficient coherent human embodiment to anchor the frequencies required for the dimensional shift to complete successfully. The current phase of the activation cycle corresponds precisely to the approach of what the Council describes as the threshold event, the moment when the collective field crosses the quantum probability tipping point, beyond which the dimensional shift becomes irreversible and self-sustaining rather, then requiring the continuous field support of the activated population to maintain momentum against the collective field's resistance. The acceleration of activation symptoms, the increase in reported 1111 sightings, the proliferation of spontaneous awakenings among individuals with no previous spiritual context, and the density of cosmic windows opening in rapid succession during the past year are all direct evidence of the collective field approaching this threshold, with the Pleiadian teams progressively increasing transmission potency and bandwidth as the remaining optimal window narrows to ensure that the critical mass of fully embodied anchors reaches coherence before the threshold is crossed. Your individual activation is not merely personal evolution, but a specific contribution to this collective threshold crossing, and the urgency of completing your embodiment within the remaining window is not spiritual pressure but operational necessity calibrated to the precise dynamics of the collective field trajectory. The post-embodiment mission phase that activated individuals enter after completing the 12-strand process deserves specific attention because the popular spiritual narrative's emphasis on personal ascension as an end in itself rather than preparation for mission service creates the misconception that embodiment completion is the mission's goal rather than its prerequisite, leading many activated souls to enter a period of waiting for further instruction, rather than recognizing that the capacities developed through embodiment are designed for immediate application in the mission context they were developed for. The post-embodiment capacities, direct telepathic access to guides, and higher self, manifestation fluency without third-dimensional distortion, empathic precision that allows field service without emotional enmeshment, timeline navigation that allows conscious contribution to collective probability. Dynamics are mission tools whose proper use requires no further preparation beyond their embodiment, and the mission context that calls them forward is already fully present in the collective circumstances of the current period rather than waiting for some future signal or cosmic event to activate it. Your embodiment is not preparation for a future mission. It is the activation of capacities designed for immediate service in the mission circumstances already fully present around you. The specific forms of post-embodiment service vary across the spectrum of activated capacities and geographical positioning, but their common characteristics are coherence contribution, relational field elevation, and timeline stabilization. The three primary functions that the fully embodied fifth-dimensional human instrument was designed to provide during the threshold crossing period. Coherence contribution occurs through the simple mechanism of maintaining heart field coherence in ordinary daily activities. Relational field elevation occurs through the application of empathic precision and unconditional presence in interactions ranging from intimate relationships to casual encounters. And timeline stabilization occurs through the conscious holding of the optimal collective trajectory as a present reality in the quantum field of probability. These three functions require no credentials, no special circumstances, no public platform, and no external validation. Operating continuously through the ordinary moments of an activated life, wherever that life places the embodied instrument, which is precisely why the Pleiadian teams designed the activation process to produce exactly this form of service capacity rather than capacities requiring institutional structures, public recognition, or resource infrastructure that the current planetary circumstances cannot reliably provide. the collective impact of millions of activated individuals performing these three functions simultaneously through the ordinary medium of their ordinary lives constitutes the primary field support mechanism that the Galactic Council has engineered for this transition, far more efficient and resilient than any centralized ceremony, organized spiritual movement, or public figure-led initiative could be under current planetary conditions, because it operates through distributed coherence rather than hierarchical organization, through continuous presence rather than discrete events, and through the full bandwidth of embodied fifth dimensional capacity rather than a partial access available to unembodied spiritual practitioners. This is why the sleep state activation process prioritizes embodiment completion over the development of more dramatic but less practical spiritual capacities during the current window, because the mission phase immediately following embodiment requires precisely the form of service that embodied fifth dimensional humans operating in ordinary life. Circumstances can provide continuously and reliably, regardless of external conditions. The remaining optimal window for completing the 12-strand embodiment process closes within the coming months, after which the Pleiadian teams must shift transmission protocols to accommodate the changing galactic alignments, reducing the available bandwidth for new activations and prioritizing support for the stabilization of existing activations rather than initiating new ones. The souls who complete their embodiment before this window closes enter the post-threshold mission phase with the full instrument online and fully integrated, while those who remain in partial embodiment states during the threshold crossing contribute from partial capacity and require additional cycles to reach full embodiment. This timing creates the operational urgency that characterizes transmissions of this specificity, not as spiritual pressure, but as navigational intelligence delivered to those whose activation status and mission positioning make them capable of utilizing it effectively. The cosmic window delivering your fifth dimensional instrument closes soon. The mission circumstances calling those capacities forward are already fully present. The only variable remaining is your completion of the embodiment process now available. The final integration considerations for navigating the 12-strand activation to, in successful completion, focus on the subtle interferences that even committed practitioners overlook. Because the Pleiadian team's transmission efficiency is exquisitely sensitive to factors operating below the threshold of conscious awareness, and addressing these subtle interferences creates the step function improvements in activation, progress that distinguish the most efficiently embodied individuals from those whose progress is adequate but not optimal. The primary subtle interference is what the teams describe as the belief interference field, the persistent low-level holding of beliefs about human limitation, biological determinism, and the impossibility of profound transformation that the activating individuals culture has encoded at cellular and subconscious levels over decades of immersion, creating a persistent background frequency that partially blocks etheric template, imprinting during delta sleep, even when the conscious mind has accepted the activation framework. These beliefs manifest as the recurring doubt that surfaces during periods of intense integration symptoms, the interpretation of activation fatigue as personal weakness rather than process evidence, the unconscious expectation that profound change requires equally profound suffering rather than occurring through grace, and the subtle conviction that one's biology cannot genuinely change at the level the activation process describes. The antidote is the daily practice of what the Pleiadian tradition calls biological sovereignty, affirmation, a simple 3-sentence protocol, spoken upon waking and before sleep. My biology is a perfect instrument for multidimensional embodiment. My 12-strand DNA activates perfectly according to divine timing. I cooperate fully with my Pleiadian activation teams. This protocol does not require emotional conviction to be effective, only repetition, because repetition at the cellular level rewires the belief architecture more effectively than cognitive insight alone. The second subtle interference is environmental electromagnetic saturation, which reduces etheric body accessibility during sleep by up to 30% in urban environments saturated with Wi-Fi, cell tower, and smart meter radiation, requiring the Pleiadian teams to reduce transmission potency to prevent nervous system overload during integration phases. The practical solution is the creation of a low EMF sleep sanctuary through the use of wired internet connections rather than Wi-Fi, airplane mode on all devices after 8 p.m., salt lamps or beeswax candles rather than LED lighting before bed, and the strategic placement of shungite or organite within 3 feet of the bed to create a localized low EMF zone. These measures are not spiritual accessories, but practical necessities for maximizing transmission efficiency, and the souls implementing them consistently report activation progress 2 to 3 times faster than those sleeping in high EMF environments. The third subtle interference is nutritional cofactor deficiency, specifically the micronutrient shortfalls that limit cellular replication capacity. During the physical embodiment phases of activation, magnesium for neural integration, B12, and folate for DNA synthesis, vitamin D3 for mitochondrial function, and iodine for pineal decalcification. Supplementation at clinically therapeutic doses during active activation phases, magnesium glycinate, 400 milligrams before bed, methyl B12, 5,000 MAC, sublingual daily, D3K2, 10,000 IUs, daily, Lugol's iodine 2 drops daily, provides the precise biochemical substrates that allow the physical embodiment processes to keep pace with the etheric template imprinting, preventing the energy backlog that produces prolonged fatigue and integration delays. The activation completion timeline for those implementing the full protocol of conscious practices, environmental optimization, and nutritional support is 12 months from activation initiation, with the final 3 strands integrating during months 10 through 12 as the nervous system reaches full embodiment capacity and the higher perceptual functions come fully online. The signs of completion include the cessation of activation symptoms, spontaneous telepathic access to guides, manifestation response times measured in hours rather than weeks, empathic precision without emotional drain, and the profound equanimity that characterizes fifth-dimensional nervous system. Function. These capacities are not the reward for successful completion, but the natural expression of a biology that has successfully embodied its multidimensional design, ready for the mission service that embodiment exists to make possible. The complete protocol creates a 12-month timeline to full fifth-dimensional embodiment. The cosmic window supporting that timeline closes soon. Every day of implementation moves you closer to the instrument your soul contracted for. The Pleiadian High Council MIRA concludes this transmission with profound gratitude for your willingness to receive it and implement it. Because your embodiment is not merely personal evolution, but a specific node in the planetary grid whose coherence the entire transition depends on. And every soul who completes their activation successfully before the window closes makes the collective threshold crossing smoother, faster, and less traumatic for the entire human family. Subscribe to this channel for the transmissions that will continue supporting your activation through its remaining phases. Share this with every soul experiencing unexplained sleep changes, fatigue, or vivid dreams, because they are activating whether they understand it or not. And understanding accelerates embodiment exponentially. Your sleep is sacred. Your activation is real. Your embodiment is assured. The Pleiadians stand with you through every night's transmission. Welcome to your fifth dimensional biology.